GAG, everybody. Welcome to what's going to be another great DevNTell. So if you didn't know, DevNTell is a 30-minute window for members of the DAO to showcase something they are passionate about or have been working on. This could be an awesome project you've been working on, demonstrating unit testing best practices, automation goodies, smart contracts, how to structure a project, etc. Basically, if you got a passion for something, this is your opportunity to share it with the community. And today, I am happy to introduce Max, who is the creator, famously the creator of Homebrew, who is here to show us his new venture called T.xyz. Go ahead, Max, take it away.
Thanks. Hey everyone. So yeah, like it was 13 years ago yesterday actually that I made the first commit to Homebrew. Oh, that's what GitHub says anyway. I'm pretty sure that was like me squashing a few commits into I have a tendency to do this honestly. I get ridiculous about how the Git history goes, initially anyway. Although I did continue that with Homebrew for a while, I have to say, we had a strong policy that we wouldn't do any merge commits. And honestly, at this point, I think that was us being somewhat ridiculous about it. But that came because I learned to use Git over the previous 18 months before I started working on Homebrew. And merge commits were the only way anyone knew how to use it. And when you looked at the commit history, it was impossible to read anything. Right? This was like early days of Git, so nobody knew how to use it. Like people who learn Git nowadays think it's like really difficult to learn. And try and imagine learning how to use it when there wasn't even any Stack Overflow answers, like telling you what the hell you're meant to be doing. And there was numerous different ways to use it. Like nowadays, we generally standardized on a few different flows, and there's everyone learns those, and I think most people don't even realize the enormous amount of interesting things you can do with Git in that respect. Anyway, so yeah, 13 years ago, Homebrew, and obviously became like a much bigger success than I even imagined it could be. When I was building it, I knew that I was kind of onto a few things that I felt were going to work. I had a history of open source already at that point. Before that, most famously, I worked on this music player for Linux that I think still exists, although I'm not really familiar with it. Now I'm like more of a Mac person. It was called Amarok, and I worked with a few other guys on that, and we were globally separated. Like we had people in Australia and America and all over Europe. And it was great fun, and that really got me into working on open source. So I always, whenever I worked on anything, just naturally gravitated towards releasing open source. Every company I've worked at, I've always tried to get something open sourced, and like the unique and interesting exception there is when I worked at Apple. They have a very strict policy about what you're allowed to open source. It has to go through their lawyers, obviously, and you can't work on any open source that is not released under Apple's banner. So while I was there, I had to actually stop working on any open source software and delegate what projects I had still that I maintain personally to other people. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, really. Oh yeah, so I worked on Homebrew like full time for a while. I quit what I was working on otherwise, and just lived off savings. And over the years, I just rotated basically between jobs, contracting, and quitting in order to work on open source full time. So in that period, it became important to me to try and figure out how open source could be funded, because I'm not unique. There's many people who are super passionate about open source. Like online, I have a reputation that is strange to me because I've literally dedicated thousands of hours of my life to unpaid free software. And people seem to think otherwise of me, and certainly starting T has not helped. It's interesting to see the kind of comments I'm getting from people who work on Homebrew still. I'm sure that all of us who are working in Web3 now are kind of familiar with that. Well, anyway, this is about tea, so let me fast forward a little bit. About 9 months ago, I was once again trying to figure out how I could work on open source full time. When I do work on open source full time, I come up with interesting things, and some of them are very successful, and some of them are like nobody's ever heard of them. It's difficult to market open source. I basically invented JSX like 8 or 9 years ago, but no one ever saw it. Mine was built with Ruby, and it was like a pre-compiler, and you could write JavaScript in with your HTML, and it was quite good. And I was working with a friend on a music startup actually at the time. And that's what I built it for, so that I could do the website of that. But nobody's ever heard of it. It's still on my GitHub actually. I called it Bull Script because I thought that was funny.
Nice.
I certainly I've always been one for coming up with names that I think are somewhat amusing. A couple of years ago I tried a Patreon. I just couldn't get enough people to donate for me to be able to work on open source full time. And Tidelift do actually give me some money still for one of my libraries, Promise Kit. That's a library for iPhone, which gives you good promises. It's probably the best promises library for iPhone dev, but nowadays you don't need it so much. But they still give me a little bit, and I have a bit of sponsorship here and there. But it's just, it's never been, as far as I could tell, possible to really get sponsorship correctly. And I don't like bounties. It's not for me. I was thinking about this again, and I hadn't worked on Homebrew for 6 or 7 years at this point. In a way, it was a rage quit. I just couldn't handle it anymore, working on Homebrew like a lot of hours and having a full-time job. And I find it difficult to do two things well. Mm-hmm. I have to dedicate myself. So I was like, okay, the community at that point had really emerged. There was a lot of people working on it with me. And I felt that, the tool was mostly done. So I was like, okay, I can move on. And I was into iPhone dev quite heavily at that point. Got into it early, fortunately. And that was, I thought it was an exciting area for me to explore as a career. But in the years since, I kept notes about what I do for a sort of brew 2. I'm a bit of an obsessive notes taker. So I had pages and pages of ideas. I never really considered doing another brew because I'd done it before. I'm not usually interested in doing something again just because I could do it better. Right. I like new things. And so also it seemed like a mature product. I didn't see the niche, what was going to make it into something that was super different and great and worthy. I don't believe in making something that's slightly better just for the sake of it. Then you just end up with 4 or 5 different choices for devs and other users when really they should only have a couple of good ones and you're not helping anything. But I have a friend, he's my co-founder at T, Timothy Lewis. I met him about a decade ago in Chicago. And we've worked on a few things here and there over the years. And he got into crypto, where I did not. I was interested in iPhone and mobile, and for me that seemed much more interesting even when crypto was nascent, which, with hindsight, everyone who's like me and has missed that wave is regretful of, but, I just kept missing it essentially. And he kept, every year or so contacting me and saying, hey, you should check out this and you should check out that, and I'd go and have a little look. But I didn't see how it was that interesting to me, because money was never really the most interesting part of work. I need money. Everybody needs some. Yep. So I needed to obtain enough so that I could live. But I wasn't particularly interested in obtaining a lot, apart from the ultimate ideal for me is to have enough money that I can work on whatever I want without having to worry about it anymore. But last year, he was like, okay, we're calling it Web3 now. You should check this out. He sent me a few links and I checked them out. And while I was looking into this, I started to have the idea for what is tea, how I could build a brew 2, and we could add this really interesting extra part where we can remunerate open source software. I saw how digital contracts aren't just money, that you're automating entire categories of how that money, that value is is transferred and how it is governed. And so it started to occur to me that maybe there was something really interesting that we could do there. Like tools like Homebrew, package managers in general, they're completely unsexy. They're an essential tool that everybody needs. Everyone needs some way to get all that stuff they have installed and ready so they can get on with dev. And then when it works and when it works well, this is one of the reasons I think Homebrew was so successful, is I dedicate so much of my time to making sure that it just worked well. When it didn't just work, it gave you good error messages that helped you to find out what the solution might be. It directed you to good resources that would help you. And we just always were optimizing for making sure that it got out of your way so that you could get on with what you wanted to do, which was the work, the app you're building. Essentially, that's why I started Homebrew in the first place. I was frustrated with the other tools there. But my co-founder will say, if you want Max to do something, make sure it's frustrating to him. And it's essentially true. Whenever anything is difficult and I'm wanting to use that thing still for something, I usually end up building the tool that I need and then open sourcing it. And the vast majority of open source I've ever built is that. I want to get to the result. Sometimes getting to the result ends up with something that I'm more interested in, and that was Homebrew. So yeah, he got me into it, and I saw that we could build something different. And the package manager is uniquely placed because it sits under basically all open source. Not all of it, of course. Well, at least on Mac. But we're making T cross-platform, and that was one of the things that I always wanted Homebrew to be honest. Homebrew is kind of cross-platform now. That's because, from the start, we built it to be somewhat agnostic. We started with Mac, and when you're building open source, you can't really do everything. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted T to be funded this time. But it meant that I can hire people, and thus we can really tackle all the parts that are necessary. Over the last 10 years, open source has become more and more corporate, which I don't like. I don't like that Microsoft and Facebook and Google, in a sense, have become controlling parties in open source. Open source was always, in a way, it was kind of hippie-ish. I remember talking to a girlfriend's dad about how I worked on open source at one point. And the guy was like, so it's like hippies then, innit? I was like, no, I don't like that. I don't want to call it something that is hippie-ish. But in reality, that was how it started. It was about communities of passionate developers coming together to build the tools they needed in order to, achieve often humanitarian goals. The internet is probably the most significant invention of humankind. It has done the most good, and open source was, the base of that. That's how it came to be something that did good. It wasn't these massive corporations controlling it, and that's how it's become. It wasn't that even 10 years ago. Well, one of the things that certainly we want T to do is make it so that open source can go back to being about the people who are passionate about that little niche that they understand and that they're good at and that they need to build, so that they can work on that full time, have a good salary out of it, and not be have open source drift away from being driven by corporate agenda. I think, a lot of these companies like Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, they are doing a reasonable job of making it so open source is still kind of open source, but at the end of the day, you don't know that. And you can't see it, and you can't tell. And even though their money has made it so that open source is more stable, the parts they're maintaining at least, it needs to be taken back to the community. And web3 made me see that we drifted away from that. The web2 turns the internet into this corporate controlled, centralized nightmare, really, and we can't maintain that. So we're super determined with T to succeed in decentralizing open source again. And our graph, as we call it, which is the protocol, and we open sourced our white paper yesterday. So it's super new that you can read about how we intend to build out the protocol portion of what is T. But it's effectively like a blockchain-based package registry. And package registries, since open source existed and since like the idea of a package manager emerged, have been like these typically centralized places where you might have it behind a CDN of some kind. But it's there's people that like Homebrew. 95% of the work is maintaining those package descriptions, and it's essentially just duplicated labor, which is ridiculous by itself. Also, it's just like this centralized place where you've got security issues associated with it, and potential results of censorship, and also like left pad incidents where people like freak out. Like, that guy had numerous reasons for yanking left pad, like when was it, 2016 or whatever. And when he did it, like the internet basically couldn't build any JavaScript for 3 days, and so it really brought attention to the fact that these systems are centralized. And as much as I respect the guy's right to take away what he'd created, you can't. Open source is not about individuals. Open source is this enormous collection of people coming together to build things together, and you do not have the right to stop the internet from working. So with T, our decentralized blockchain-based package registry, once you put something in there, you can't take it out, and we'll make it rewarding for you, because the staking mechanism we're using, that we're calling steeping, because I love to add a little bit of terminology in there that's related to the overall theme of the product. I'm not going as far this time as I did with Homebrew. I think I didn't know where the line was quite then, but where it makes sense, where there's things that are unique, using words that are unique. That just, the metaphor is good, so people will have an understanding of what it means. But those stake rewards will flow through the entire open source graph. And this was like one of the things that I felt is wrong with sponsorship and bounties. Like I see tools like Gitcoin, and we've talked with Kevin from Gitcoin already about how we're going to work together. See those as being complementary to what we're doing. There's still room for bounties, for sure. And people who have some money and need a feature should be able to post a bounty or need something fixed. But I feel that bounties and sponsorship both, only reward favorites, things that people know about. Like Log4j in December was a great example about how open source is tens of thousands of packages, but people don't know about 90% of those packages. 90% of this open source is, we call it the Nebraska problem because of the famous XKCD comic called Dependency, where there's this tower of bricks that represents, he says, modern digital infrastructure. And then right near the bottom, there's this little one on the right-hand side. I'm sure everyone's seen the comic, but I'll go into it anyway. It's holding up the whole stack, and it's like, a tiny little pillar. So it's not very safe. It's not very stable. And there's an arrow to it that points and says that someone from Nebraska has been maintaining this thanklessly since 2003. Plus, we use this a lot when we're talking about T, because the internet is held up by a lot of these fragile little pillars, by people who are not able to maintain those things they've built properly because they never had a mechanism in place that allowed them to do that. Now, they still go in there every now and again and fix things because they feel responsible. I know that very well. I know that feeling of responsibility where even though someone's come onto your GitHub and opened a ticket and they're rude and they're pissed off at you because something's broken and they don't appreciate the fact that you don't get paid to maintain this thing, I still feel responsible to that person because they chose the thing I built. They chose to use it. And I appreciate that, honestly. I appreciate that validation that something I made was useful to some people more than just myself. But without pay, it's very easy to become angry. And Mike McQuaid is the guy that I handed Homebrew to when I quit. I've known him for years. I knew him back from when I worked on Linux on KDE, which is this desktop environment. He was part of that too. He's an awesome guy from Scotland, and he does great talks. You should definitely check out some of his stuff. But I feel that he is a bit ruder than I am about people having expectations of your open source, and that's like one of the ways we differ. He is like, no one, you're using a free tool maintained by unpaid volunteers, and you can have no expectations. And he like blocks people and on GitHub so that you can't, report bugs or even like participate in the community. And I totally get where he's coming from, because anyone who's maintained an open source project knows that frustration where people have expectations of you, even though you're not paid. So yeah, fundamentally, like, I think everyone understands that it's a problem. Like, how on earth we've got this far? The internet's an amazing thing, and 80 to 90% of it is free software that no one really got paid for making. So I use that as an example as well. Like, how much further ahead do you think we'd be if the people who made this stuff were rewarded for making useful things? I reckon like at least twice as far ahead.
Sorry to
Probably a
interrupt,
good time
Max.
for questions.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're about 9-10 minutes till time. So just time checking. But yes, I think you were prompting for questions here.
Could continue talking with a prompt for sure.
Well, let's see. Does anybody in the crowd have any questions for Max? His story is very inspiring, and I've been pretty much glued to my screen listening to him uninterrupted. So please, if you do have any questions, this is the time to ask.
Like, while we're waiting for a question or
Yeah.
something. So yeah, we released our white paper yesterday. Product of about 2 to 3 months of hard work. Me, Timothy, my co-founder, and Thomas Burrell, who are a very experienced blockchain product person, who not an engineer per se, but is like extremely well versed in all facets of how blockchain works and managing team devs who work on it. So that was released yesterday. It's open source. We realized that we just want everything we're doing to be open source. So there's the repo on our GitHub. You can just Google T.xyz and it will come up with all our stuff. And it's written in Markdown with LaTeX, and we use Pandoc to build it. It's great. I'm really happy with like our build pipeline for our white paper, and I'm versioning it semantically. So the PDF that's generated, there's a little version in the corner. It's great. I've been working on the package manager itself for probably 7 or 8 months at this point, and it's really coming together. I hope to have it released yesterday to go along with the white paper, especially because it was an anniversary of Homebrew's commit yesterday. But it just isn't ready, is the truth. Like, I didn't open source Homebrew immediately. I never open source anything immediately. I know how important it is for that README to be solid. You gotta have a great README that when people do visit, because like getting attention for open source is difficult. They're like, oh, I see why I want this. I see why I need this, and I see how I'm going to use this. So I've been working a lot on the README, but the tool itself is pretty much done. I'm just like a little nervous about a few of the design choices, so I'm holding off. But it's a great tool. Honestly, I'm not even sure if we're going to call it a package manager. Like, one of the realizations I had after I stopped working on Homebrew is that a package manager can be way more than just something that helps you to install a few things here and there and maintain them, keep them updated, make sure that you have easy access to configuration, things like that. Like, it's this fundamental like tool that sits underneath all other things that a developer needs. And this T is developer focused, like 100% developer focused. Homebrew was initially 100% developer focused, but the user base gradually expanded to include just about everybody. Because some of the stuff that a package manager provides, there's just no other way to really get that stuff. Like scientists, engineers, architects, musicians, games developers, like there's so many different kinds of profession that need some of these tools, and there's no good way otherwise. Like, you can't download a .app for some of these things that architects, engineers, and scientists need. They're command line tools. They're things that get used by like anyone. So it became a general package manager for everybody. But T is 100% focused on developers and will be forever. We want it to be a great developer tool, and everyone else can use Homebrew.
Yeah.
I don't want to replace Homebrew, which I think a lot of the Homebrew core were worried about, and a lot of the people who have been negative about T on the internet, I think they see it as I'm like this bitter person who's trying to replace my tool because it ran away from me or something.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not true, and hopefully people will start to see that once we've released. We're calling it T-clee, but package manager essentially, and I'm hoping that's 2 weeks to a month. We'll see. Like id Software and some other like games devs companies, they say we'll release it when it's ready, and
Yes.
that's certainly how I feel about these things.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Seeing as we only have a few minutes left, I guess, um, what was your inspiration to kind of join the DAO and present today? Uh, is there something you're looking to have people in the DAO kind of help out with, developing the product, or um, is it ready for use for some of the projects in the DAO?
Yeah, cool. Excellent question. So yeah, I joined the job sometime last year when I was just looking into Web3 in general, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool. I have to check this out."
Yeah.
Easy NFT purchase. Um, so that was before we announced and came in. But as soon as we announced, I came in here and I was like, "Hey, so I'd love to work with anyone here." And also, we are hiring. Like, I have a number of positions available. The package manager itself, because we're going to be cross-platform, I need people who will help me maintain it on Linux and Windows. I also need people who can generally just like contribute to that stuff. I need generalists in general. Like, we have back-end
Nice.
parts, we have front-end parts. And also, like, surprisingly, I actually need a couple of React devs for a secret part of the project that we will be building over the next 9 to 12 months. My co-founder thinks that this secret project could like be a very, very significant thing, and I am tempted to agree. Building on what I've been saying about how package manager can be so much more than like this unsexy package manager type terminology,
Yeah.
because of where and also based on the fact that we got this really like impressive remuneration component. Like, we intend to be significant and to change how open source is funded. That's all we're going to change. I must emphasize that we're not changing anything else. No, nothing about what T is will change how you use a package manager and tools like that. You're not going to have to pay to install packages or anything like that.
Right.
Like, read our white paper. Our funding model is indirect, based on staking rewards. So people who want to participate in the governance, and that's the thing. Like, we're going to like try and alify most open source projects in effect, and have the open source community come together so that they can govern the ecosystem on top of what we're building. And I'm super excited about that. But yeah, so we're hiring, and like as soon as I open source the package manager part, like I'll be in all these channels, like waiting for feedback and working with people on that. But for now, like, go and check our white paper out and like, open a pull request. It's version 1, but you could be in version 1.1.
Awesome stuff, man. Yeah. Super, super exciting to see where this goes. I'll definitely be using this as time goes on and it matures. Uh, Unfortunately, we are at time, and I believe there's
Just
another
one
meet.
more thing.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
One more thing. Another thing that people here must do, in my opinion, go to T.xyz and authenticate with T. It'll connect with your GitHub. There will be rewards, so
I
go
Yeah.
and do that.
I already did that yesterday, FYI. I got ahead of the game. Uh, but yes, please, everybody, if you have some time over the weekend, there's nothing better to do than check out T.xyz, read that white paper, and get involved. And uh, in terms of the hiring, if people are interested, do people email that alias that's on the site, or is there a formal
Um,
application board or something?
it's hello at T.xyz. I deliberately haven't like specified any specific job requirements and stuff because
Gotcha.
like generally I'm just going to hire people that fit. Strong open source background is like obviously very impressive to me, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm just looking for self-driven, smart people who get things done. Like execution is basically everything for me. Obviously, I'm famous for failing my Google interview, so computer science is not that important to me.
Awesome, awesome. Great stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on DevNTell, Max. Really appreciate it, and the entire community, I believe, is also very appreciative as well. Everyone's intently and quietly listening to you speak. So, uh, that's awesome. So I will be dropping a link for POAPs for the attendees in the developer's voice text. Max, I'll forward you a special POAP for being a speaker, and I just wanted to wish everybody a happy Friday, happy weekend, and we will see you back here for DevNTell next week. Till next one, gang. Cheers.